Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mavs. Kevin Gray, Mavs Insider for 105.3 The Fan, joined as always by my partner, Grant Afseth of Mavs Sports Illustrated. Appreciate you joining us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. You can also watch this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. You can also subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube at Grant Afseth. Really appreciate all of you who checked out our last episode with Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype. Joined us on the program last time out. If you didn't have a chance to listen to that, make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast again, wherever you get your podcast for free. Got a great show lined up for you today. Before we get into anything further, got to welcome in my partner, Grant Afseth. Grant, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Looking forward to talking about Summer League. Other people aren't as enthusiastic about spending 11 days in Las Vegas and still talking about it, but I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you had a bunch of tremendous work that was done in Vegas. Obviously, the breakdowns and watching Dereck Lively, Max Prosper, Jaden Hardy, obviously Jared Dudley with what he was able to do from a coaching standpoint, leading this Mavericks Summer League squad to a 4-1 record during their time in Vegas. And not only that, we'll get into some of that. Also, Grant Williams doing the tour de force of podcasts these days, as he was on with the Run Your Race podcast with Theo Pinson. And then, as we record this, was on the episode, this is the latest episode of the Old Man and Three podcast with JJ Redick. It has some interesting things to say about not only how aggressive the Mavs were in terms of pursuing him, but also how he feels like Luka Doncic can grow in his game. And we'll start there before we get into some of the things, with the Summer League, because I found Grant Williams' comments now as he's making his first, kind of public comments, with being a member of the Dallas Mavericks and a player who you could tell really wanted to be on this team. And some of the things he detailed was, number one, that we'll start with, is the idea that the Mavericks are really aggressive in their pursuit of Grant Williams and wanting to make sure that he was a part of this team. Him saying that they were, quote unquote, overly aggressive in making sure that they made it happen and they were able to get him. What did you think about some of that, knowing how it looks like the Mavericks made him a focal point of their free agency and they were able to make it happen with Boston ultimately doing a sign and trade with the Mavericks in that way?
Yeah, I think with how limited the general landscape was for free agency, I think it was very important to make your interests very well known with the players you did want and to, press to get something done. A lot of cooperations needed from the player side and the team side. And then, even a third team side with the Spurs being involved in that trade. So I think you got to really be assertive and push forward to get that sort of a deal done, especially very quickly after those restricted free agents are allowed to start signing the offer sheets and, getting a deal done. So I think, in terms of the player fit, it makes a lot of sense. They really needed to add a bigger frame. He's not, by bigger frame, not 6'9", height wise, but around 235 pounds. They were very small after trading Dorian Finney-Smith. Reggie Bullock slid over to that 4 spot, and he's 200 pounds. So they really needed to find someone like Grant Williams, and there weren't a whole lot out there. So you got to get a little aggressive to get it done if you are very limited on your options.
Yeah, and the Mavericks really made it a focal point to ensure that they got their guy, because Grant Williams, at the age of 24, as you mentioned, about 6'6", around 230, sturdy frame for a guy that goes about 6'6" or so, who's going to be playing and defending multiple positions for this team. And I just found his, characterization of the Mavericks going after him very interesting, given the fact that the Mavericks made it very clear throughout the course of this offseason that they wanted to improve their terms of 3-and-D guys and guys that can not only defend, but knock down shots. And we've seen Grant Williams in playoff situations, hit 8 threes in a playoff game, seeing some of his role be diminished a little bit in Boston as this past season went on. And he even detailed some of that, speaking with JJ Redick on his podcast. It'll be interesting to see now for him how much more of an expanded role he's going to get, because he's going to be a starter for this team going into this upcoming year. But what that does for him and his confidence, knowing that he's going to have not only a bigger role, but going to be counted upon for this team to really set the tone defensively every single night for the Dallas Mavericks in that way.
Yeah, for sure. I think, they definitely needed someone to take on that like low man role that Dorian Finney-Smith played so well and, switch onto the tough assignments, handle those. But I think, in terms of the offensive side of the ball where he's, expected to have that bigger role since he already was that key defensive talent for Boston. I think if you think back to how Luka played in the half court with even guys like Reggie Bullock, he was involving them in no, it's not directly like guard to guard screens, but that's like typically what you would call it when it's like not the five that's coming up to set the ball screen. Reggie Bullock would get involved in those types of plays a lot. You get a switch, and since Reggie Bullock's not an off the dribble type of player, it would be a lot of like Luka getting into an ISO. But Grant Williams is more capable of attacking like straight line drives, attacking off the catch, things of that nature. So I think that's where he could get an expanded role. I think at times, last season, especially after the trade, the Mavs started playing around with more like creativity with the half court since they had Kyrie as well. You can, throw out whether it's like horn sets with, Grant Williams, maybe being someone at the elbow. You can even use double drag screens where Grant Williams with his frame is one of those screeners and you have a rim roller. That'd be a tough sequence.
It's a tough cover. Yeah.
As an on-ball defender, you got to get through 235, 240-ish pounds on that first screen and handle a roller and all that stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of options where I'm sure in training camp they can get into it. And like it's back to what Kyrie Irving even said after he got traded. They didn't have a training camp to kind of work their install things into their offense. And having all those new pieces at the start of the season as opposed to kind of piecing a roster together or making a big midseason move, should help to iron things out and make that expanded role clear by adding layers to the half court offense.
Well, clearly this is a motivated Grant Williams who sees himself not only as a perfect fit for this team, but his ability to now provide versatility on both ends of the floor is something the Mavericks are going to be welcoming, and why they really targeted him as the guy for them in free agency. Obviously, outside of Kyrie Irving and bringing him back, Grant Williams seemed to be that guy. He also, as he was having his conversation with JJ Redick on the Old Man and Three podcast, had some very interesting things to say, not just about how excited he is to play with Luka Doncic and how his game will flourish with him on the same team, but also some areas of growth when it comes to Luka Doncic in his game. Take a listen to what Grant Williams had to say when it comes to Luka Doncic and where he can still grow in his game, and we'll react to it once you finish listening to it. Take a listen.
Yes, but with Luka, he does a great job of, like, no matter when you feel like you're open, he's going to find you. Like, he get at the very last second of the shot clock, hit you for a pass that is a dime just to give you a shot and give you an open look. So I'm excited just because he brings so much pressure and attention to himself that he does a good job of getting others involved. And I think that's his growth. And his next step is understanding that as much as that happens, he also has to empower others to play their games as well. So I think that's the next stage with him and this group that we have. Kyrie has been in the league long enough that he knows how to make a tough shot, but also knows how to get off the ball. And Luka does a pretty good job of seeing the floor from the start in the beginning. And it's just a matter of he definitely has that like competitive, like, I can get the shot off any time, but I'm gonna make sure the other guys get a good look if it's open. And so I'm excited for the really spacing and being able to knock down shots around him, but also being able to crash and create more opportunities. Because I think a little bit difference with two guys that we have in Dallas versus the guys I play with in Boston is that we have a bunch of guys around that are like utility that can do pretty much a lot of it all. Like Tim can score, you have just Josh Green and guys like that who are more like aggressive downhill that can also make plays at the rim and rebound and offensive rebounding plays. And Dwight Powell is more of like a crashed course dummy who's going to run in there and just smack the ball to half court every 2 seconds. So it's really exciting just because it's a different group. It's a different team to play with. Like, I'm so used to back when I was with Boston, like switching or playing a certain like rolling off as well, just standing in the corner. But I feel like I'll be a little more empowered to play a little bit more of my game in Dallas, to be able, like, whether it's screening Luka and getting the matchup and hitting there and rolling, he's hitting me in the pocket, or it's picking and popping, and knocking down shots.
So I want to focus in, Grant, on the part where he said his next step is understanding that as much as that happens, he also has to empower others to play their games as well, which I found to be kind of interesting because the reaction on social media to the, comments that Grant Williams made was fairly mixed, with some saying, oh man, finally somebody's going to keep Luka accountable, giving an honest assessment of his game and what he is and what he still needs to work on. While there were others who were saying, is my man Grant Williams a casual? Because it feels like Luka already does that in a lot of ways in terms of empowering his teammates to be able to make the plays that they're capable of and utilizing his vision to be able to create for his teammates. How did those comments land for you based on the way that you heard them and saw how Grant Williams was describing not only his fit with the Mavericks, but how he feels like Luka can still grow in his game with them?
Yeah, I think it's very fair assessment of the situation, because I feel like in general, like Luka, for example, he hasn't had another perimeter co-star in his career for like a full season, a couple seasons. With Kyrie Irving, that's an adjustment in itself. You're going to do things differently when your co-star is a point guard who can play off ball, play on ball, versus Kristaps Porzingis, who, is setting the screen for you. And it's a more like, just inherently natural sort of, cohesion, if you will, where you have the 2-man game, and it's a lot easier for a guard and a big to be, in the mix together. But I guess, like that's an adjustment in itself. And then having players that are more, I guess, threatening with the basketball in their hands. I don't think it's like too much of an adjustment at all. But I think naturally, players do have to adjust when changes around them occur. And I think it's just, it's just a general assessment that, I'm sure it's not going to hurt Luka Doncic's feelings hearing that, like, he's had like a sky high usage rate. Now he has, some more capable players around him. And, basically let us make the game easier for you is essentially the way I took that. And I'm sure he'll gladly do that, throughout the upcoming season, not having to dominate the ball as much, like to create everything. Because there's a difference between, still scoring and making plays, but not initiating everything. Like it gets probably pretty tiring when you're getting blitzed on a pick and roll at the start of the shot clock. You're giving the ball up, the ball pops around, finds you, and you're ISOing with like 6-5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Like that's more challenging than like, hey, I gave the ball up in that short roll, and now I have more capable talent around me that's just going to score and make it, take advantage of that 4-on-5. Like that's empowering your teammates in itself, and you're not like necessarily, oh, I'm just going to stand in the corner now and I'm mad because Grant Williams and Kyrie Irving are getting into a 2-man game. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that for sure. Like I think that's just a pretty like normal like basketball comment in my opinion. Just any changes, someone's going to have to adjust.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing for me, is I don't think Grant Williams is necessarily wrong. I think his framing for some may be misconstrued by the idea that Luka isn't a guy that's empowering his teammates to make plays because he's too selfish to give up the basketball in order for those guys to make plays. It's going to be an adjustment period for Luka to not only get a much better feel for Kyrie Irving and now Grant Williams and what that means for his ability to reduce some of that usage rate as you're talking about, but more importantly, how that informs other guys to be able to feel confident to make plays on their own without having it all be initiated by Luka Doncic, because you have guys like a Kyrie Irving, Grant Williams, who can handle the ball a little bit in terms of some of his capability there. It's not going to have to all be on Luka to facilitate every single aspect of the offense for all of these guys to feel like they need to be able to make plays. Kyrie can do that. There's a little bit of playmaking ability with Grant Williams in some ways, even though he's more so of a knockdown 3-point shooter when he's getting open looks. There's going to be opportunities for other guys to be able to handle themselves and to do so without Luka Doncic being the focal point on every single play, because this goes more toward, as we get deeper into the season, if the Mavericks are playing well and find themselves competing for a playoff spot, you're just having a much more fresher Luka Doncic who hasn't had to use all of his energy and expend all of that throughout the course of a regular season, trying to set up and facilitate offense, not just for himself, but for his teammates as well. So I think there's going to be a definite adjustment period, and I think his teammates will be able to find ways to not only make plays for themselves, but feel like they are a part of this offense. And the last thing I'll say on this too is, for Luka, one of the criticisms that we've had about his game throughout the course of his, first 5 years in the league is, can he be more of an off-ball player? We will find out more this upcoming season with him being teammates with guys like Kyrie Irving and others, how much more movement will he create for himself off of the basketball, because there are other guys that are capable of handling it. And I think that's some of the things that Grant Williams is talking about too, is with their abilities to be able to make plays, can Luka now do other things differently without the ball in his hands that can really put pressure on defenses to make different decisions on how they go about not only guarding him, but having to go out and take care of other guys as well on the offensive side.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you look back to last season and you really like from the start, you think about how, like, I guess the lineups, the approach that the team had. Think back to opening night, for example. You have Spencer Dinwiddie at the 2. You have Reggie Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith on the wings, and JaVale McGee was the starting 5. I don't know about you, but I don't know many actions or plays I'm running for any of those other guys. Like,
correct.
Spencer Dinwiddie can put the ball on the floor and, make high pick and roll stuff that, that's also, a possibility, but also you have to factor in that with Jalen Brunson leaving and them not necessarily addressing that from the start, you still have to conserve Spencer in that on the opening night. You have to conserve him to run the bench unit as well. So like, there's like a lot of little like push and pull things that go throughout 48 minutes. That's why you'll also see like Kyrie Irving after the trade. He's not necessarily trying to dominate the ball. He's picking his spots for the whole first quarter because he has to be the one that dominates, that second quarter as the lead with Luka Doncic on the bench. So, having more layers of like capable attackers, if you will, and playmakers goes a long way. And even if you just look at internal development, you have Jaden Hardy entering his second year. At the start of last season, we even in December we were like getting comments. No, I'm not criticizing right or wrong, whatever. Like just the time the timeline here. But we got the comment when the Mavs were in early December. They were in Denver before the game. Jason Kidd was like, those minutes are accounted for. We can't give Jaden Hardy and Josh Green more time. Basically, something Twitter coaches along those lines. So,
I remember that.
So like the whole point being here is that those players are capable of attacking, but they also had smaller roles, throughout a lot of last season, early on and during the points where you would want to probably conserve Luka's energy to make him more durable for the whole 82. But with another year under their belt, a whole offseason to work on their game. And even Josh Green, he has opportunity with, Australian national team. You're going to be more confident as a coaching staff playing those guys in more substantial roles, making plays going forward. And that's not even factoring in that they added, a Grant Williams, Seth Curry, however they're going to utilize that, along with Kyrie Irving, re-signing and entering training camp, with the idea and the vision of how are we going to attack as an offense, let's get on the same page from the start. And, all those things add up to where you can now allow more of a flow and not have Luka have to make so many plays. Because I think a lot of the issue with those comments from the people that seem to have a problem with like that assessment is that I feel like it was taken as a knock by some, like he doesn't want to allow people, other people in the offense to attack in this way. But I feel
which for some has been a rap that Luka has obtained from other people who have watched his game and felt some of that way. Maybe that was some confirmation for them and how they may have assessed Luka Doncic's game, which to me has been incorrect based on what we know about him.
Yeah, because there has been some players, in the NBA, like Max Strus, for example. I think we mentioned that on a previous episode. He mentioned how hard it would be to play with Luka. For the same, probably the way that comment was perceived by some of those people. And I think just overall, it's hard for us to sit here on July 21st talking about how a team's going to play in October, November, December until we really see it. This is why I like with so many changes and, development of players, I just love thinking of, in training camp, being able to ask about it and observe and things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to follow, but I guess as they work things in, and you would hope at least that there's a more layered attack with the pieces that they added, and that's why they added those pieces. I think even just Josh Green's development in general, this is supposed to be a very big year for him entering a contract year. He's had as we mentioned, a full off season to work on his game. Last season, he showed shooting improvement, But, there were some times last year where they utilized him in actions like, as a screener, Luka as a screener, things of that nature. How can that be expanded as he, continues to gain confidence and grow in his game? Those are the types of things that we won't know until we see the games, kind of play out and see training camp and practices. But there's a lot of possibilities that are intriguing and variables, on July 21st that we could talk about now. And I'm just very excited and intrigued to cover a team that's, kind of made a lot of changes and see how they work through it as a team with all that talent next season.
Well, that's a perfect transition to some of the things that we have seen that we saw in Summer League. Obviously, you're talking about the player development and the growth of guys like Josh Green, who continues to work on his game. But for guys who were in Vegas, we're talking about the Jaden Hardys of the world, obviously for Max Prosper, for Dereck Lively, really good learning opportunities for them, not only to get reps, but more importantly, start to get a feel for some of the things that we thought for the reasons why they were drafted, specifically with Lively and Prosper, about what their contributions could look like for this team. We've heard reporting that a guy like Max Prosper could find himself, if the situation is right, developing himself into the rotation as the season starts to begin. The same with Lively as well as he continues to grow. Let's start with some of the observations, though, from Vegas for you in terms of Lively and Prosper, the two focuses in terms of the rookies, obviously for the Dallas Mavericks, and what you saw in terms of their growth from game to game as they really started to assimilate themselves with this team. For folks who forget, those two didn't even practice until they got to Vegas because the trades had not been finalized as of yet. So they were practicing for the first time in Vegas and then thrust into games while they were there. Talk about some of their growth as far as your observations you saw there.
Yeah, for sure. I think with, throughout the whole time in Vegas, a very constant theme was how confident Jared Dudley, the, Summer League head coach, is in Omax being capable of getting minutes as a rookie. And that's not to say to be a highly impactful player from the start, literally tip off game one, he's going to make a big impact. But, 2 months, 3 months, however months in, he could work his way, get comfortable with the NBA, and factor in as a genuinely impactful talent. I think they really like how he can switch on defense, guard multiple positions, being 6'8". And, I think he's got a great frame already for a young player. A lot of wings enter the NBA, they're very thin. But 3 seasons of college basketball, he's, utilized all of his off-season programs, I'm sure, to add weight to his frame. And, he's going to be ready physically from the start. And I think with him, there's some things that, could be still improved as well, like getting more fluid, making decisions on his drives. There's times where he kind of lost his footing, or I think didn't necessarily make the ideal read when he got into the paint. That's something that Jared Dudley mentioned, he'll need to continue to improve on. But I think in general, they just like that he could attack, closeouts. He's aggressive. He'll finish off 2 feet with the fake, very often. He gets a lot of people with that. And even when, he attacked Jarris Walker against the Pacers, he didn't get Jarris Walker to bite on the fake, but he at least, had his balance, was under control, and he finished a great play with his right hand, on that drive. And, things like that are very intriguing to see from, anybody, but especially like a rookie wing, when you think about how okay, well, how can you build on that? Well, one thing that I think in terms of his improvement area to kind of think about is, I don't know how many actions they're going to throw him in as a rookie, obviously, or even year 2, but there's some improvement areas. He was in a handoff, the Hawks, they were very adamant about going under on him, and he didn't think about taking the pull up. He just turn the corner, attack downhill. Typically, typically with,
take what the defense gives you, young man. Just got to take it what the defense gives you sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. If you have it in your game, take that pull up, knock it down. And I asked him about it, and he, after that game, and he definitely said that, as I develop, I'm just paraphrasing, but that's definitely something I could see, being important in my game. And, that's what you're going to get. Players are able to dominate physically at lower levels. And then they have to adjust when they play at that higher level in smaller roles and things of that nature. And I think he showed a lot of, immediate impact potential, as well as those, continued developmental areas. And I think, just getting to Dereck Lively as well, he, I would say offensively, is a pretty raw offensive player, but they're not going to be asking for too sophisticated a stuff. It's set a good screen, roll hard, catch a lob. If the lob's not there, make a good short roll pass, or just use your touch in the paint. Those are the types of things that like it takes time to get used to. It's not necessarily like trigonometry or anything like that, but it does take some time to get familiar with your ball handler that's getting you the ball. Get familiar with attacking NBA defenses. Like, how quickly is that big going to be able to recover when they're backpedaling and trying to keep me from getting a lob? Oh, well, they actually a little quicker and a little longer maybe than I thought. Okay, well, that like things like that. Like, there's a lot of little nuances that kind of take place as players get used to the NBA level. And I think for both of them, I think that's going to be a requirement, and it'll be interesting to monitor. But I think defensively, just getting into that, he had some plays where you could tell where a drive happened and they're just deterred to challenge him. Like they,
very much
the
so.
the guard got into the paint and they're like, yeah, no, I'm good on that. They just dish the ball out, and it just keeps like a loop. Like the Warriors were a great team, as an example. Their team, they didn't have like elite attackers by any stretch, but they, they like moved the ball, kept cycling through and dishing it out again and again on a couple possessions. It just showed rim deterrence. And that's definitely something that the Mavericks lacked. Like, I even talked to a couple players that played the Mavericks at points of last season, and I would just talk to them about different stuff and just get their thoughts. And some of the things that were mentioned is that there was no interior presence. You need an interior presence.
Which is something we've lamented for a long time for this team, for sure.
Yeah, you need an anchor. You need someone who's going to strike some fear into a guard, at least make them think like, okay, can I get there? Can I finish this playoff? And if they're confident they can attack, that's the worst thing you can necessarily have as a professional sports team, is the opposition feeling confident and comfortable that they can attack and get what they want. You have to at least create variables. That's why teams throw out different schemes throughout games. Like, all the players, their understanding of how to attack those schemes, but you have to have unpredictability. And that's even something as well as the anchor that, I think is important to touch on. Like with Dereck, he has to learn the schemes as like the communicator, as the anchor. And, they like to try what was called like channel one ball screen coverage, where, he played up at the level of the screen and he has to, basically keep no roll man basically gets behind is the idea, like backpedal from there. And then if there's a need for a switch, he'll call veer. And then he'll take the guard, and then the on-ball defender is responsible for basically accounting for the roll man. And the idea is to basically prevent dribble penetration, deep in the paint. And the thing with that is, if you don't have a physically, I guess you could say, imposing option as the anchor in that situation, you may not deter the drive, and you may not be able to handle the switch that fantastically. But with Dereck Lively, as long as he gets comfortable with those judgment calls and gets his timing down, the thing that's really impressive about him that stood out is he's got a 7'7" wingspan.
Yep.
And this isn't a brag to say, oh, I sat at the court side at Summer League. I'm sure most people don't give a crap about going to the Summer League game, but when you're sitting right by the court and you see someone with a 7'7" wingspan contesting a jump shot, and
it's impressive.
It's like, that's a real weapon to have. That's like, you think about other really long wingspan, rim protectors and just big men, like Rudy Gobert. You think of him, like he challenges you a lot as an offense when you're getting into the paint. But what's interesting about Dereck Lively is that he plays more outside in space. And if you can play up at the level of those screens, then those smaller guards that, may have gotten that pull up against drop coverage, they're going to have to think twice about taking that quick pull up. And then all of a sudden, when they're getting downhill, as long as he gets comfortable making those veer switch calls and just timing in general with committing, accounting for the roller and the ball handler with two with one situations, that's going to be a real weapon if it develops how it should. And that's basically what I was writing, on Dallas basketball, like a shameless plug on that one. But, I actually just wrote that today. Basically, like, he has the physical tools to be exactly what the Mavericks have needed as a 5 to execute their defensive scheme at a high level. And now it's a matter of, getting comfortable, learning the ins and outs of it, if you will. And, just the early return is that, he was up and down. He even graded himself as a C plus, B minus in how he executed the channel ones and just general like weak side rotations. Just getting comfortable with the timing, as we've said, is important. Because there's a lot of challenges that go into adjusting to the NBA, even at a summer league level. You gotta be understanding of how quick the athletes are, how the actions look when you're helping off the dunker spot, things of that nature. Just a lot of stuff. So it'll be interesting to track, throughout his rookie season and even in training camp. But yeah, just overall, there's a lot to like about both of those players. And that's the thing about young players overall, is it's like, there's a lot to like as they enter, and just seeing how they respond to things as things are kind of hoisted on them, responsibility of an 82 game season. You also have to worry about the rookie wall as well. And just a lot goes into it. But yeah, there was a lot to like about what I saw out in Las Vegas for sure.
Yeah, a couple of things that really stood out for me is that you could tell early on, especially starting with Lively, screening was not necessarily a forte for him early on in Summer League. But as the rest of the games went on, you could start to see him get a little bit stronger in terms of forming the base, in terms of setting the screen, being able to not only set the screen, but rolling hard to the basket, being able to make a play out of the short roll and try to make some better reads based on what he was seeing there. You could see marked improvement based on the way that the summer was going on. And you talked about the length for him on the defensive end. I think one of the things that stood out for me is as he continues to learn how to utilize his spatial awareness, not only when it comes to drop covers, but also hedging, being able to get back, that's going to allow his other guys to be able to recover as well, to give him that extra half a second to be able to make a play on the ball or be able to get back to their, to their player that they're defending. That just helps. I think that's why we talk about so much with this team, with the lack of defensive presence, why that's so important, because not only for just the interior presence of a big man, but what that does for everyone else around him to be able to guard and be much better in terms of whether it's recovery or being able to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of getting in the passing lanes. All of those things get a little bit better because you got a guy that really can deter things happening at the basket, but also be able to make his other teammates better. And I think that's the best defensive big men make their other guys better because of their versatility. And if Lively can continue to grow in that and use that awareness in space and understand from an IQ standpoint what he's trying to do from a schematic standpoint, that's a huge deal for the Mavericks based on what they're trying to do, especially when you look at, defensively, how much more they want to be better than they were a year ago. And that having that interior presence is going to be good for them. And then for Prosper, look, you talked about it. He is not afraid to attack a closeout, which is good for him. At the same time, though, take what the defense is giving you. And if he is able to do some of the things when it comes to from a pull-up jump shot standpoint, adding some of that in terms of his repertoire to his game, now we're talking about a guy that can make defenses be a little bit more choosy on what they want to do and now put pressure on them as well as he grows as a little bit more of a playmaker and passer, all those things that come with growing in terms of his game. But for me, you could tell from a guy that's been, spent a few years in college, we compare him to Dorian Finney-Smith in that way. He's already much more advanced in terms of a player going into his rookie year than Dorian Finney-Smith was, obviously as an undrafted player out of Florida. But as he now is at that point, there are more tools within his bag that he can build upon now that I think will give him a much better learning curve as the season goes on. That could make him a potential rotational player, given some of the skill set that he already has. I think we saw some of that in flashes in the Summer League play, which I think would encourage Mavericks fans, based on what they saw from him there.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the immediate holes that are filled, like, whether it's with, regardless of who it's with, if it's with the bench unit, like alongside, like, it's honestly, it's too early to figure out who's going to be filling what role. But overall, like, alongside even, Dereck Lively at the 5 and you have Omax at the 4, that's a lot different physical profiles than what they had last season, even with the starting lineup, but especially with the bench unit. Like, JaVale was utilized at times towards the end of the season, like very end of the season, where it felt like it was dwindling very fast. But, having, instead of like a reliance purely on, like a Dwight Powell at the starting 5 and then Maxi Kleber at the backup 5 and things of that nature, you at least have different options and looks you can throw out too. And I think that's something that just is such a valuable part to have for a team that has such talented offensive players as well. Like, you can have a roller that can catch lobs when you need it, but if the matchup calls for something else, you still have that stretch 5 you can throw out there. And if the rookie, learning curve is, you're not going as fantastic or hits a bump, because progress isn't always linear. You can
Sure.
always just throw, you can throw like Dwight Powell out there, someone who's going to be technically sound on the screen and catch a lob, things of that nature. So I think like just having different options, instead of having a big amount of pressure early on, is good as well. Because there's some rookies where you could say, oh, they're going to get a lot of opportunity to put up shots, things of that nature. But it's important to do that within a structure where they're doing it in a winning way, if that makes sense. Like there's an intended structure where they're filling an important role, doing little things, earning their way, and they're not necessarily gunning it on, like, because there's some teams out there like like the Houston Rockets the last couple of years. It's been challenging to necessarily have games where they're giving a full 48 minutes of effort. Like there were some times I remember last year where I would see clips and they're not even getting back in transition, and people are like, this is borderline not professional basketball.
Yeah,
so like
yeah.
having that, like, going into an environment, it's hard to like confidently say a winning environment when we're a playing team, but the general vibe is, there's a lot of talent on this team, and there should be capability of achieving at least like a playoff run of some nature if things fire on all cylinders. So that's a lot more of an immediately like responsible situation as a rookie than you're entering like a rebuilding franchise where 25 wins is probably your projection. So, those are, seeing how they respond is going to be interesting, because I guess my whole point being is that when you hear them talk and you ask them questions, big things that they mention are just, they love to do their responsibilities. Like they're wired to basically, not saying they limit themselves, but they know that they're asked to do a role and they're going to try to do the best that they can. Hearing that kind of mature outlook from somebody entering the NBA before they even like really get interaction with the main players on the roster,
That's huge.
It's huge, and it's not super common. Most players, they're not even sure what their game is. Some players don't know what their game is in year 2 or year 3. And hearing, that outlook, being on the same page as what the team is seeking, that alone, I think, gets you on a good start to at least be on the right track and see how they respond to the NBA, context, situations of matchups and schemes and all that stuff. But yeah, I just think it's two very intriguing pickups to throw in. And you're not necessarily trying to add a player who thinks they could be like a superstar perimeter player pounding the air out of the ball. You're adding players that know they have to do the dirty work, and they're going to embrace it.
As we get ready to close here, obviously Jaden Hardy had his summer league cut short a little bit, dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury, but it looks like he's going to be okay throughout the rest of this summer, so he'll be fine there. Obviously, the Mavericks were able to make a couple of signings from summer league as well. The local kid, Mike Miles, going to be able to be around on a two-way. I believe it's on a two-way that he'll be around, with the Mavericks. So some really cool things that we saw from summer league, and some of these guys are going to be getting more opportunities as well. In fact, you did some reporting on a player that was able to get an Exhibit 10 contract. Tell us about him real quick before we close our show here today.
Yeah, actually, I have an interview that I did, before the last game that I'm still working on and probably going to put out tomorrow, Saturday, for people that are listening to this. But I thought it was interesting because, Taze Moore, I talked to some people around him, and they mentioned that he had interest, like from the Lakers, the Trailblazers, before the summer league started. Like he did some mini camp stuff with them, and he earned that Exhibit 10 deal with his play in Vegas. And at like 6'5" around there, he's a surprisingly like explosive athlete for someone who, like, I'm not going to get the exact days off memory, but he was out for like 630 something days after he broke like multiple bones in his leg while he was at UC Bakersfield before he transferred and played at Houston for his final year of college basketball. And I actually asked him, like, he described his game, when describing how he would make an impact on an NBA roster, and it sounded a lot like Bruce Brown. So I asked him, like, you guys are similar physical profiles, like around the same height. You do a lot of, the dirty work, but you also have some ability to put the ball on the floor and make some reads. I said, that sounds a lot like Bruce Brown. And he said, yeah, that's someone that I actually, one of my favorite players to kind of study right now in like the current NBA is Bruce Brown. So I thought, that was interesting, considering, how impactful, Bruce Brown was to the Nuggets, title run as a, helpful role player And,
Mm-hmm.
on the Mavericks, you're going to need perimeter players that are capable of hitting open shots and, having those guard to guard screens, like we talked about with, Grant Williams, having someone that can make that read after the catch on the roll and just being able to, do the dirty work, run around in transition, fly around in the half court on defense, that adds up. It's not like overly sophisticated stuff, but, I think depending on how development goes and opportunity shakes, I felt like if called upon, that could be something to kind of keep an eye on with Taze Moore. And he took advantage of his opportunity in Vegas, and I think Jordan Walker as well. He was already signed to an Exhibit 10. I think the initial reporting just said a 1-year deal. From Chris Haynes of Turner
Mm-hmm.
Sports, but like the clarification there, he's on Exhibit 10, and he didn't start out getting minutes at all in Vegas, but he was able to get opportunity with McKinley Wright going down, Jaden Hardy going down with that shoulder injury that you mentioned, and he showed some pretty intriguing stuff. He's a very small guard, but a very talented offensive player. And for him going forward, the idea is that the team wants him to, become like a pesky defender, if you will, like get in the ball, be very aggressive, talk a lot on defense. And I think just overall, like thinking about like the rest of the summer league picture here, like Jaden Hardy in his development is something that I think that was the focus entering it. And he played 3 games, and I think it's still an ongoing process for him. He was like the clear-cut focal point of every team's like strategy. Like he was getting like aggressive nail help on his first possession from the Thunder with like Cason Wallace as the on-ball defender and like Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren as front court defender. So it was a good test for him to kind of
Sure.
put into practice, what he's been working on, because a lot of the focus is like film work, reading the low man, handling like defenders playing up on the screen, drive coverages, all that stuff, initiating and attacking as the initiator, I should say, and seeing that in practice. I think there's still ups and downs. I think, having more established talent around him probably would have done him more justice, but you can't necessarily, have that perfect situation when you added, like the goal isn't summer league. Like who cares about that? That's not the focus. When you add 2 first-round picks that are, developing their game as well, there's going to be some, I guess you say, clunkiness, or, like a lot of burden is going to be on the experienced guy. So I think, there were some situations where I felt like schematically the opposing team was able to really load up on him, and that in a way
Mm-hmm.
isn't like the ideal situation for, I guess you could say like development, where you're going to see the schemes you'd see in the regular season. Like a team's not going to handle covering Jaden Hardy or guarding him that the way they did in Las Vegas, I guess is my
Sure.
point. But yeah, just seeing it's a good situation to at least see how the response is. After I believe I forgot the exact game it was, but I think it was after the second game. Jared Dudley was mentioning, that he wasn't necessarily listening. Like he kind of doing his own thing on offense in the first half of the game, and he liked how he responded. Like those are the things, like not necessarily running the intended offense in the first half. You don't want to hear that at all. But handling that primary responsibility and at least responding in the second half, that's an intriguing thing to at least have and go through. He only ended up having 3 total games, but he has a lot of film to work with going into the rest of his summer. And, it'll be important that he, off ball defense is something that has been an emphasis for him. Like, like not having like lapses where you basically lose track of the player you're supposed to account for. And it ends in a bad possession, and then just continuing to make that balance of,
Mm-hmm.
like being a talented scorer, but getting teammates involved in reasonable ways. His shot wasn't falling on pull-ups, but I felt like at least there was some, like improvement with decision-making as his like 3 games kind of went on, especially that third game. He started making more like, like getting into the paint, making spray out passes, things of that nature. But overall, I think the big thing, in addition to everything, that was mentioned, is that handling those athletic shot blockers when he's attacking out of high pick and rolls or just in general, playing off of 2 feet, using some fakes, learning from some of those guards that he has on his team, like, Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic. They're very patient players when they get downhill and get into the paint, short range stuff. Just continuing to sophisticate his approach in those areas would go a long way, because there was a lot of times where I felt like he was launching off 1 foot and was trying to like stretch out and finish with one hand, and a shot blocker like kind of blew the play up at the rim. And those are things you want to be more technical, getting to a spot, using counters, playing with more pace in those situations. And that'll also be something to kind of monitor, in addition to like the passing reads going forward for him offensively.
A lot of terrific stuff coming out of Summer League for these guys that are still growing, with Dereck Lively, obviously for Max Prosper, Jaden Hardy, getting to be the kind of showcase guy for this Dallas Mavericks team throughout the course of Summer League as these guys continue to work on their games. Going to be a lot to continue to take in for these players as they move forward. Last note before we close today, Michael Scotto, who we had on our last episode of Inside the Mavs, reporting that the Mavericks could show interest in veteran Rudy Gay, who is now available after being released by the Oklahoma City Thunder. Not going to lie to you, Rudy Gay wouldn't move me necessarily one way or the other as they continue to move forward this offseason. But that is just another piece of news there for Mavericks fans who were wondering if there is still another move to be made. Next week, we'll get into a little bit more of what could be done still for this team as they try to improve before we turn the calendar to August. But that's just another piece of news there for Mavericks fans who are looking for that in terms of whether or not another move could be made as well. So just something to look out for there. So a lot of terrific stuff coming out of Summer League. Grant was fantastic with all his coverage in Summer League. Really appreciate you. Again, you're the people's champ of this coverage thing, and people were looking for all your stuff throughout the course of Summer League. You spent the entire time there and did terrific work there. So really fantastic job with all of that. And obviously now back here, a lot of cool stuff to still be able to break down going forward here for this Mavericks team. So Grant, tell the folks where they can find you and the work that you're doing as we great close today.
Yeah, for sure. You can find like a lot of my work on DallasBasketball.com as well as on my Twitter feed. And, looking ahead to August, Dirk Nowitzki's induction into the Hall of Fame. I'll be able to provide some coverage there as well, like with the press conference and the ceremony. So that'll be intriguing. And then, international basketball with there's actually quite a bit of guys. I know Maxi Kleba is not apparently playing for Germany anymore after the Dennis Schroeder situation, but there's Josh Green in Australia, Dwight Powell, Canada, Luka Doncic, Slovenia, a lot of different names participating for their national team, and that'll at least carry us through the very
month of
NBA
August,
dead period, the very dead NBA period, all the way through the start of the training camp period. So I'll have coverage of that. I'll have the Synergy account fired up throughout the whole thing. So if you want breakdowns of Josh Green or Dwight Powell or Luke, I guess you could be interested in Luka breakdowns. There might be a couple people that like that, but I can get around to that one for sure. But yeah, there'll be a lot of stuff. 12 month responsibility for sure.
Well, make sure you find all his stuff on Twitter at Grant Avseth. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports, dropping my Mavs news and nuggets. Really appreciate you joining us on this episode of Inside the Mavs. That concludes this episode of our latest episode of Inside the Mavs. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. And of course, you can check this out on YouTube as well on my channel at Kevin Gray Sports. Subscribe to Grant's channel as well on YouTube at Grant Avseth. Going to have a lot of terrific breakdowns and stuff that he's going to be putting up on his YouTube channel there. So you make sure you subscribe there as well. Until next week, this has been Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.